Welcome to the lecture 21, the potential production simulation input factors. So, we have discussed about the concepts of the crop modeling simulations, and this as a Forrester notations are the for the compartment model symbols. And this lecture we will be discussing about the simulation process in a potential production simulations, and then the biomass and the grain simulations for the potential productions. So, today's lecture are the input parameters, particularly for this potential production simulations. Earlier lecture, if you see or discuss about the different production situations, potential productions, attainable and the actual production situations. These are the three production situations for which crop models are available. And if you see the potential production, see the maximum yield can be attained for a crop when all the conditions are optimum, particularly the water, nutrients and the weather parameters are optimum, and the plant does not suffer from any type of the pest and the weed infestations. So, when everything is optimum, all inputs are in optimums including other parameters, we can get the potential productions. So, next to potential production is attainable productions, where the crop is protected from pest and diseases and the crop does not suffer from any type of the water and nutrient stress. That is the attainable productions, where most of the experimental yield in the research stations, so we get the attainable productions. So, farmers field yield that represent the actual productions, where the farmers do take care of the pest and diseases. Our challenge is how to bridge the gap between the attainable and the actual production, that is say the yield gap. So, most of the models are available for the actual productions and attainable productions, so that we can recommend the management options for enhancing productions to reach the attainable yield. Here I am giving the potential production simulations, particularly the weather component is concerned, how the crop yield is influenced by the weather parameters, that is explained through potential production simulations. And where the other modules are switched off, particularly the other managements, water, nutrients and the pest and disease, those modules are switched off in potential production simulations. So, today we will be discussing about the input parameters for the potential production simulations, and also recall this earlier lectures we have discussed about the effect of weather parameters on crop growth and the yield, how the biomass and yield can be predicted using the solar radiation and temperature that we have discussed earlier, that will be reviewing in these lectures. So, with this see this is the concepts of the potential production modeling as I was discussing. So, this is the potential productions that represent maximum biological possible yield, which is which we can get in a controlled environmental experiments, and where the crop is well protected from the pest and diseases, and the crop does not suffer from any type of the water or the nutrient stress. That means that's assumptions. There is no water stress, no nutrient stress, and no pest and disease or weed damage. And the crop is fully protected from pest and diseases, and the crop does not suffer from water and nutrient stress. Then the yield is dependent upon the weather parameters. So, these are the assumptions: no water stress, no nutrient stress, no pest and diseases, and yield is dependent upon the weather parameters, that is weather conditions and the genetic characteristic of this variety, because this how we can exploit the maximum genetic potential of the variety in a particular the soil and the atmospheric conditions, that is for the potential productions. So, we can get the maximum potentials of the crops using the optimum weather parameters, where the soil and the management constraints are considered non-limiting. So, in particularly the models built for the potential production simulations, we do not have the modules for the soil or the management. These modules are switched off as if these are the optimum conditions. This focus is on physiological growth process to exploit the genetic potential of the crop, the physiological growth process, that how they are influenced by the varying weather parameters. The potential production defines upper biological limit of crop growth. So, this is the maximum productions which can be attained with the optimum weather parameters. So, this one for the potential production, where again I can repeat this one for this all the other modules are switched off in this crop model, the management modules and the pest and diseases, they are switched off. And management, that includes from your land preparations up to the harvesting, includes everything like tillage, seeding techniques, sowing, nutrient management, water management, plant protection measures, weeding, everything, all are assumed that they are all optimum conditions. So, there is no stress, the crop does not suffer from any type of water or nutrient stress, and the crop is well protected from pest and diseases, and soil has sufficient supply of the water and nutrients. So, only the crop yield is influenced by the change in the weather parameters. So, the weather parameters are the main drivers for the crop yield. So, they are the solar radiations, like using solar radiation, the conversion of the carbon dioxide to the carbohydrates, the photosynthesis where the carbon dioxide is converted to carbohydrates using the solar radiations, that is the effects of the solar radiations used. And in case of crop model, we discuss when you go for the DSAT, particularly the other inputs. So, we have the mainly 4 the essential weather inputs. If you can give the additional weather inputs, that is well and good, but minimum requirement are the 4 weather parameters like temperature, that is maximum temperature, minimum temperature, will give the rainfalls and solar radiations. So, these are the 4 major weather inputs for the crop modeling. So, that is for the solar radiation, that is a energy for the photosynthesis. Then temperature, that is as we discussed, temperature influence the developmental phases and growth. The solar radiation mostly regulate the growth of the crop, the biomass accumulations and yield formation, that regulated by the solar radiations, and the temperature that regulate the developmental phases. That means, the transformation of from one phase to another phase, that depends upon the temperature. The crop accumulates certain growing degree days for a particular growth phases, then that then transformation from that phase to the subsequent phase. So, temperature mainly regulate the developmental phase, the crop development, and solar radiations mainly influence the biomass productions. So, these are the important parameters. Then carbon dioxide concentration, of course, because for photosynthesis. So, the carbon dioxide, the crop, the intake of carbon dioxides, then conversion of carbon dioxide to the carbohydrates by the solar radiations, using solar radiation. Then day length, photo periods, that is day length influence the crop phenology. So, along with the temperature, the solar radiation day length of photo periods, the short day or long day plants. So, there may be it is a sunshine hours. You have the short day plant, long day plants, there is a decreasing day length or increasing day length. So, that influence the on developmental phases of the crop. So, as discussing earlier, of course, if you give the crop is exposed to sunlight for 24 hours, in that case, or the light, you can visible light for 24 hours, there the transition, the transformation from one phase to another phase is delayed. So, you need say dark periods and the light periods. For the balance periods for the photosynthesis, and the nights usually they go for the mostly for the respirations. So, that is a balance phase of the crop gets energy for the biomass productions. So, day length is very essential, important for the particularly for the developmental phases of the crop. The crop, but if see weather, usually the crop does not influence the weathers, but only microclimates may be to influence to limited extents, but in general the weather, the climate or the weather, that influence the growth process of the crops, the biomass accumulation, the developmental phases, that are influenced by the weather. As you are assuming, because I can say, so we are assuming other factors are the optimum, because there is no stress of water and nutrient, the crop is crop has the sufficient supply, you can say optimum availability of the water and nutrients, and the crop does not suffer from any type of the pest and disease stress or biotic or the abiotic stress. Then the growth is or the development of the crop is influenced by the weather parameters. So, you can see the how the radiation and the temperature they influence the growth. You see the radiation particularly for the responsible for this biomass production, and we assume that the efficient radiation intercept at high Li. If the leaf area index, the crop attains the leaf area index at the peak vegetative stage, and with the high leaf area index there is a interception of the radiations, because radiation interception depends upon the leaf area index. There is no shading or canopy stress, in this case there is a higher interception of radiations, and the radiation we get as a daily or the hourly incoming radiations, that is a megajoules per meter square per day. So, this is the unit that is a input in the crop model also, the radiation units. So, if you see earlier probably you have explained this one, the yield is the multiplication of the H is the harvest index, RUE the radiation use efficiency, RI is the radiation interception, the total radiation interceptions. So, this is how to calculate the radiation interception, that is influenced by the leaf area index. If you remember the earlier lectures, we have explained there how the leaf area index and also the extinction coefficients. The leaf area index, extinction coefficient, that influence the radiation interceptions. As a intercepted photosynthetically active radiations, that is equal to P r into 1 minus e to the power minus k into L I. I think this might be clear to you. So, as I have discussed earlier, the radiation interception R I So, photosynthetically active radiation at the top of the canopy, and K is the extinction coefficient and Li the leaf area index. So, with this the intersection of radiations and biomass is equal to RAU radiation use efficiency into radiation interception, because this RUE is gram per megajoule, amount of biomass accumulated per unit interception of radiation into radiation interception, that is a megajoule per meter square. You can say summation because of the full total radiation interception during the crop growing periods. So, if you see this one, this comes biomass gram per meter square. So, this is how the biomass accumulations in case of the crop canopy. So, that depends upon the leaf area index and extinction coefficients. So, with the as we discussed earlier also, with if there is a increase in leaf area index and RI, that increases and remain constant, and here the factor that influence the K value, and with RI radiation interception there is a biomass that is also increases, remains constant. So, there your factor is RUE radiation use efficiency. So, conversion of the radiation use efficiency into biomass RUE. So, then we have the biomass to grain yield So, there is a harvest the factor contributes to your harvest index. So, the harvest index, there is a conversion of biomass to grain yield. So, the point I am saying here, the weather parameters, particularly solar radiations, that is that influence this biomass by interception of radiation. The radiation interception that is regulated by this the leaf area index. So, leaf area index the higher leaf area index, there is more interception radiations, and same also the extinction coefficient k value. So, there is a more interception radiation with increasing k value and with increasing leaf area index. So, PR is the photosynthetic active radiation, because when you talk about the radiation interception, that is the photosynthetically active radiations. So, PR at the top of the canopy and PR into e to the minus k into Li is at the bottom of the canopy. So, difference of the PR at the top of the canopy and PR at the bottom of the canopy, that is the radiation interceptions. So, this is the role of the radiations. Then temperature that regulate photosynthesis. Photosynthesis of the crop, that is because for a particular optimum temperature. So, there is a enzymatic activity, the process are optimum with the optimum temperature. So, they influence the biomass productions or the accumulation of photosynthesis by the optimum temperature. Also, that respirations, the loss of some of the carbohydrate is lost to respiration, that is also influenced by temperature, and the particular developmental rate, the rate of development is influenced by temperature. So, the temperature we have discussed growing degree days, how the growing degree days concept is used to predict the growth phases that we have discussed. So, growing degree days the TD minus TB, TB is the base temperature for the crop, the base temperature below which the crop growth and development stops, and TD is the average temperature, the daily average temperature, T max plus T min divided 2. So, every crop requires certain amount of the growing degree day for transformation from one phase to another phase. So, depending upon the weather parameters, if the temperature is lower, then that phase may be longer. If temperature is higher, that phase may be shorter. So, these are the growing degree concept is used to predict the phenophases, the developmental phases. So, if you know the growing degree days for a particular growth phases for any crop, then based upon the weather parameters, we can predict the expected appearance of the either the flowering or the maturity that we can predict, and this information will help us particularly for the input management, water and nutrients, that because the crops, some crops particularly you can say they are very specific in the input requirement at particular growth stages. So, based upon that one, if you know the because this concept whether the temperature of growing degree days, that helps for prediction of the growth phases. So, based upon that one, so we can optimize our input management at particular growth stages for maximizing this production level. So, this is what say growing degree days concept. And the CO2 concentration. So, if see the particularly the CO2 that effects on the photosynthetic rates and the radiation use efficiency, because those also should be, because every crop it has a constant radiation use efficiency. So, if but that is at optimum CO2 concentration. So, if there is CO2 concentration optimum, so that also we can get that the constant radiation use efficiency with the lower CO2 concentration, that also influence the radiation use efficiency of this crop. So, so for the model, so there is a uniform carbon dioxide concentration. You can say, you can give the model that does not give a, we do not give a variable CO2 on daily basis like other parameters. For the model, we give the 4 weather parameters on daily basis, that is the temperature max and minimum and the rainfall, the solar radiations. But CO2 we assume a constant level of CO2 during the growth duration of this crop. And there is no stomatal or the water element, definitely the CO2 effects are considered only through photosynthesis, the conversion of the carbon dioxide to carbohydrate. These are the how the we give a constant level of CO2 for a particular, but as for the current CO2 levels, it is going to CO2 level increasing over the years because of climate change. It was 280 in 1870, it came to 330 in 1970. So, in the 100 years like from 1870 the pre-industrial era and to 1970 the 100 years there was a 50 ppm increase in CO2 level. But if you see from 1970 and to 2000 in 30 years same 50 ppm increase CO2. That means that talks about how the industrializations has brought the increasing CO2 levels. So, if you see the span of 100 years to from 1870 to 1970 to increase the 50 ppm CO2, but same 50 ppm increase in span of 30 years from 1970 to 2000. Now, CO2 levels almost to 425 to 30 ppm CO2 levels, 420 plus CO2 levels. So, this is increasing over the years, but as per the UN say we have to cut our the CO2 emissions, all the development has to go on at the same time we have to follow the green technology. So, the CO2 emissions is minimized, and if you do not do then there will be now at present there is a rise in temperature almost 1.5 degree as compared to pre-industrial era. So, if there is a similar rise in temperature, it will have the severe consequences on the human health as well. Agricultural production, definitely production is going to be affected with the rise in temperature, and human health, social aspects and economic development of any nation. So, we have to every nation has to take certain steps to minimize the CO2 emissions, so that we can using green technology the CO2 emissions must be reduced from the atmosphere. And so, these are the what are the assumptions we can see how the the significance for the potential production models. So, when you go for the potential productions, so this is a optimum water and nutrients. So, definitely you are not going to play with these inputs because these modules are switched off. So, this assumption that the crop does not suffer from the water and nutrient stress, no biotic stress, that means the crop does not the crop is well protected from the pest and these infestations, the crop does not suffer from any type of the biotic stress, no soil physical constraints, no pollutants in soil, all the nutrients are in optimum and well supplied to the crop and uniform crop stand. So, these are the some of the assumptions you take when you go for the potential production particularly in a particular area. So, this the potential production but is regulated by the upper yield, which you can see the maximum yield upper yield boundary. So, this is regulated mainly by the other parameters. So, why do go for potential production simulation? Particularly it used for understanding the weather and yield relationship. So, if you are going for the potential production simulations and the crop is now well protected from pest and diseases and there is no water and nutrient stress. So, this will create an understanding of the varying weather parameters and the yield. So, we can see we can if you go for the varying weather parameters. So, in that case we can optimize the weather requirement for the yield for using this model, particularly potential production simulations, and we can find the optimum weather parameters for enhancing crop productions and the optimum weather parameters in different stages of the crop growth. Not necessarily the optimum weather is not constant throughout the growing period. The crop requires the optimum temperature, optimum weather parameters are different that varies as per the growth stages. The optimum weather parameters at the seedling stage, or you can say the as a peak vegetative stage or the flowering stage, they are different. We cannot say the significant different, they are different. If you see the rice crop there is no the temperature at the tillering stage and temperature requirement at the flowering stage are not same. At tillering stage higher temperature that may enhance the tiller formation, but at flowering the increasing temperature that brings a setback on the flowering, that has an adverse effect on flowering, that causes the sterility of the on-field grains. So, this using this potential production models for different locations, because as I discussed we can use the model for different locations. We can have a huge number of data sets and there we can optimize the weather requirement for a crop at different growth stages, and how that will help us, because once you optimize the weather requirement, that will help us to find, based upon the weather forecasting, to find the optimum planting or the sowing window, so that the crop does not suffer any type of the as a abiotic stress, particularly the stress of the other parameters on the crop. That means, we can provide the close to optimum weather conditions during the different growth phases. So, that helps us understanding about the particularly the growing periods or the planting seasons or the sowing window to have to maximize the productions. If you have the understanding of the weather and the yield, so at particular different growth phases of the crop, that will help us to identify or to recommend the optimum sowing window to maximize the production. Of course, we can see that for the climate change impact studies. So, this will help us know the model built for potential production simulations only can say if there is a rising temperature, there is a varying CO2 levels, and there is also variables radiation radiation solar radiations, how the yield will be influenced. Then we can have the we can see the for genetic improvement evaluation. So, this is the this gives a better understanding, because now this potential production simulation models, that gives the better understanding about the weather and the yield relationship to get to find the quantify the optimum weather parameters at different growth stages of the crop, and that will help us now proper crop planning, proper sowing, the optimum sowing time to have the maximized productions. The forms the foundations for the attainable production models and the actual production models. So, once you know this one, so this is because of course, the requirement data set is much lower in case of the potential production simulations, but that gives a better foundation for the other two models, attainable and the actual production models. So, this is what is the input parameters for the potential production simulations, and the models are available for the potential production simulation, that is mainly utilized for to understanding the effect of weather parameters on the crop productions and to get relationship of the weather with the yield. That we can do with the model available for the attainable and the actual productions, but this gives a better understanding, because in this case the other the crop is the crop is well protected from the pest and diseases, and there is no other stress like water and nutrients. With this, I thank you all.